The breathing was almost imperceptible. The room of suite number 7 on the top floor of the city's most expensive clinic resembled a silent mausoleum. There was a bouquet of fresh peonies on the side table, but their fragrance couldn't mask the subtle scent of ether lingering in the air, as if the entire environment was designed to maintain appearances, including those of the patient herself. There, lying on Egyptian cotton sheets, with closed eyes and an immobile body, rested Celia Mancini, 84 years old, one of the wealthiest and most feared women in the country. And contrary to what everyone believed, she was fully conscious. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, even though the monitor beside her displayed a regular low frequency. The old matriarch had learned throughout her life that silence, when used strategically, was worth more than 1,000 words. And now, feigning an induced coma after a suspicious fall during a board meeting, she had a goal: to find out who wanted her out of the way, and why. The door opened softly. Slow, almost reverent footsteps invaded the room. It was Camilla, 29 years old, the nurse on duty, but not just any nurse. The daughter of a former cook at the Mancini mansion, Camilla had grown up in the shadow of that family, always seen as the kitchen girl, even after graduating with honors from nursing school. Discreet, without makeup, her uniform always pristine, hair tied back and eyes that hid more pain than she let on. Unlike the other staff, Camilla didn't bow to titles, but she didn't rebel either. She observed in silence, and she took notes. She approached the bed as she always did. She checked the vital signs, adjusted the pillow, and for a moment stood still, looking at Celia. Her eyes were fixed on the elderly woman's face, that face which years ago had fired her mother for lack of discretion after discovering that the cook had shared an innocent secret with young Camilla. Celia's inheritance would not go to her favorite grandson, Henrique, but to an unknown fund she had created in secrecy, and Camilla never forgot that afternoon, nor the public humiliation, nor her mother's look as she hurriedly packed her bags with tearful eyes, swearing that one day the truth would come to light. "I know you're listening to me," Camilla whispered, without a tremor in her voice, as she adjusted the linen blanket. "And you know what's most interesting, Donna Celia. I always knew you weren't weak, just silent, like now." The old woman didn't move a muscle, but inside, every cell seemed to tremble. The lavender scent on Camilla's scrubs brought back old memories. It was the same one her mother used discreetly to mask the smell of kitchen grease. "What nobody knows is that I have a copy of that will," Camilla said, in the same calm tone as someone reciting a recipe. "The original one you signed in secret, transferring everything to the Aurora project. That's right, I found it and I've already filed it for registration." She looked around, ensuring they were alone. Then she leaned in, very close to the immobile woman's ear. "Henrique is trying to kill you, and all the doctors here have been bought, including Dr. Hugo. They're just waiting for a signal from the lawyer to unplug the machines. But I requested a shift change. I'll take care of you myself, until he falls on his own." Celia felt her throat dry, but she didn't react. The revelation wasn't a complete surprise. Henrique was far too ambitious, with that slippery smile of someone who always gets what he wants, since childhood. But what hurt most was knowing he would have succeeded if Camilla hadn't been there. In the hallway, the lawyer's footsteps sounded like hammer blows. Camilla returned to her professional posture. When the door opened, she was already by the bed, delicately administering saline. The man who entered looked like he'd stepped out of a tailored suit advertisement. Alvaro Montes, the family's frontman, and now the temporary executor of Celia's assets. He cast a brief glance at Camilla, like someone checking a table set by a waiter. "How's our rare jewel doing?" he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Stable," Camilla replied, "but nothing more than that." "Such a shame," he murmured, almost with regret. "Some were already preparing the memorial." Camilla didn't respond. She just kept adjusting the saline, as if each drop were a brick in the wall she was silently building. When he left, she looked at Celia again, but now there was something different in her gaze, a mix of defiance and tenderness, as if to say, "Now we're allies, whether you like it or not." In the next 48 hours, Camilla changed the saline vials 3 times, reviewed all the falsified medical reports, and photographed every forged signature. She also discreetly stole a security camera recording, showing Henrique leaving the sedation room with an empty vial in his pocket. All this without ever raising suspicion. Celia, still immobile, began to eagerly await Camilla's arrival, not for physical care, but for the tension of the next revelation. That young nurse, once invisible, was now the only bridge between her life and justice. And more than that, she was the mirror of a story Celia herself had tried to bury years ago. On the morning of the third day, Enrique appeared in the room with flowers and cameras. He was filming a final tribute to his grandmother, who, according to him, had already departed mentally. Camilla was there by the side, monitoring the heart rate and recording everything with her phone in her scrub pocket. Enrique, smiling for the camera, said in a moved voice, "Grandma always wanted to leave a legacy, and we as a family will ensure that wish is respected." That's when Celia, for the first time in days, moved a finger. The camera shook. The journalist choked. Enrique paled. Camilla smiled, not openly, but enough for only Celia to notice. The war had begun, but the one who started it was far from being the weak party. The atmosphere in the clinic shifted in that instant. The simple gesture of a finger triggered a silent earthquake. Enrique tried to mask his shock with a nervous laugh in front of the camera, but his expression betrayed him. Camilla interrupted the recording, out of caution, saying it was necessary to preserve the patient's dignity. And before he could react, she had already collected the equipment and left the room with it in her hands. The news spread like wildfire among the presidential wing's staff. The old lady moved her finger. What for many was a mere spasm, for Camilla was the signal, not of life but of consciousness, and that the game was about to turn. That same afternoon, Enrique called an emergency meeting with the doctors, demanding a new report. He wanted to hasten the disconnection of the machines. He presented a document with Celia's digital signature, authorizing orthothanasia. Dr. Hugo, nervous, hesitated. Camilla, however, was already ahead. She had planted a copy of the true will and a clinical progress report, dated and signed by herself, in the internal files. If any attempt at euthanasia occurred, the system would trigger a legal alert. And so it did. The moment Enrique pressed the request button, Camilla's name automatically appeared as the patient's legal guardian, the result of an old power of attorney signed by Celia when her mother was still employed. The system recognized it and blocked any external action. Enrique shouted, kicked the chair, threatened to sue the clinic, but the damage was done. And now, finally, someone was starting to pay attention to that silent nurse. The next morning, Camilla entered the room with a black leather folder. Celia was awake. Not fully, but with her eyes half open and her hand flexed. The progress was subtle but visible. Camilla approached, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened the folder with care, like someone unwrapping a truth. "I brought what you wrote 10 years ago," she murmured, pulling out the original will with the notary seal. "And I also brought what your grandson fabricated. See the difference." She didn't expect a response, but for a brief second Celia blinked slowly. Camilla understood. From then on she began speaking to the patient like someone plotting a war strategy, and it made sense. That room had become a battlefield, a field where power now came from observation, patience and time, not brute force. Outside, Enrique was increasingly pressured. His movements were recorded, his presence in the hallways filmed. Journalists were already suspicious of the reason behind Celia's sudden fall, and things worsened when a nurse revealed he had overheard Enrique yelling on the phone the day before the accident. "She'll sign even if she's unconscious." Camilla seized the moment. She scheduled a meeting with Alvaro Montes, the family's lawyer, and confronted him in silence. She placed a USB drive on the table containing all the clinic's recordings, manipulated exams, tampered vials, and statements from 2 employees. She didn't say a word. She just looked. Alvaro maintained his composure, but his forehead was sweating. "And what do you want with this?" he asked in a tense whisper. "Justice," she replied, "and a room." A room? For her. At the Aurora Institute. Donna Celia wanted to open it as a shelter for elderly caregivers, abandoned by their families. "I've already registered the foundation. All that's missing is a name on the plaque." Alvaro swallowed hard. "And if I refuse?" Camilla raised her eyes. "You'd be an accomplice." That same week, the Aurora Institute appeared in the news. An unknown nurse had filed the final documents for the foundation, using a power of attorney signed by Celia years ago. The initial amount transferred? The equivalent of 48 million reais. Enrique collapsed. He called a press conference to try to explain that it was part of a family initiative and that his grandmother had trusted him to continue the legacy. But during the conference, a surprise. Celia appeared on a tablet screen, sitting in a wheelchair, with a turquoise scarf around her neck and her eyes open. She didn't speak. She just looked. And that look was worth more than 1,000 sentences. Enrique turned pale. And the symbol of the turquoise scarf, which his grandmother only wore on solemn occasions, was understood as a public gesture of disapproval. He was not part of the trusted circle. He never was. And now, everyone knew. The next day, the courts froze Enrique's assets, and an audit was launched into the Mancini Group's companies. Alvaro Montes resigned, citing ethical reasons, and Camila was invited to appear before the hospital board to explain how she uncovered the forgeries. She simply showed the reports, said little. But in each silence there was authority. By the end of the month, Celia regained her speech. The first thing she said to Camila was, "I watched you grow up, and I was blind. Now I see everything." Camila held her hand but didn't respond. There was too much resentment, and also love, a rare kind of love that only exists between those who were forgotten and those who remember everything. Celia asked her to be the new president of the Aurora Institute. She said the project would be handed over to someone who understood the value of dignity. Camila declined. "For now. I want to start as head nurse, there, on the first floor, where the forgotten ones come in. I want to look into their eyes before sitting in a high chair." Celia cried for the first time in years, and that afternoon when Camila left, Celia asked them to leave the door open. She wanted to feel the smell of the hallway. The lavender from Camila's scrubs still lingered in the air. Enrique was arrested a week later, after attempting to flee with forged documents. The image of his arrest appeared in the newspapers alongside an ironic headline, "Heir to the fortune, only to the shame." And at the Aurora Institute, the first room opened bore an unexpected name, Hope's Kitchen, in homage to the woman who taught me to care, even after being expelled by my arrogance. Signed, Celia Mancini. Months passed since the day Celia's eyes opened in front of the cameras. The world had changed around her, but what was most surprising was the transformation that came from within. Not from that woman used to commanding, but from the one who, for the first time, had learned to trust. And that trust had a name, Camila. The routine at the Aurora Institute was serene but vibrant. Camila walked the hallways with firm but humble steps. She wore the same white uniform, without adornments. Only a simple brooch on her chest, with the symbol of a rocking chair carved in silver, a gift from one of the elderly women sheltered there. The brooch became a new symbol among the staff, the idea that it wasn't necessary to speak loudly to change the world. It was in care, persistence, and silent justice that structures crumbled. At the inauguration of the new auditorium, there were speeches, tributes, and journalists, but Camila didn't take the stage. She stayed in the back, observing. That's where she preferred to be, among the caregivers, among the forgotten, among the roots. Celia, on the other hand, insisted on appearing. In a wheelchair, thinner, but with lively eyes, she read a handwritten text. "When you lose control, you discover who you really are, and who's by your side not for what you have, but for what you're still capable of giving. Today, I'm no longer the matriarch of an empire. I'm a learner. And the woman who taught me to see was named Camila. She listened to me even when I pretended not to exist, and that saved my life." The applause was long and emotional, but Camila remained still, with teary eyes and hands clasped behind her back. She didn't need applause. What she wanted wasn't a stage. It was permanence. That same month, the minutes of the last board meeting of the Vita Clinic, where Celia had been in a coma, were revealed. Camila was officially recognized as a protected whistleblower and received a lifelong right to a research fund for investigative nurses. A group was formed in her name, Camila Project, aimed at training professionals who wished to report silent abuses in healthcare institutions. The chosen symbol? A turquoise scarf. Across the city, Enrique faced his first trial. The courtroom images showed a defeated man, without the spark in his eyes, dressed in a cheap suit with trembling hands as he listened to the charges. The silence he had used to manipulate now swallowed him like a cell. The sentence was read in a firm voice: imprisonment for attempted qualified homicide, document forgery, and abuse of an incapacitated person. His only reaction was to lower his head. In the audience, no family members were present, but a woman in a white scrub sitting in the last row observed in silence. As she left, she handed an envelope to the defense lawyer. Inside, there was a single photo, Henrique as a child in his grandmother's arms, next to the cook. On the back of the photo, a note. You could have been loved. You chose to be feared. The system had turned, but not by force, by consciousness. Years later, the Aurora Institute grew. It became a reference in palliative care, protection of former caregivers, and reintegration of women abandoned by their families. One of the wings began to receive women victims of hospital abandonment, with professionals trained in listening and therapeutic silence. And Camilla, now the director, still walked the hallways as before. The uniform had changed, now light grey, but the rocking chair brooch still shone on her chest. Celia passed away 3 years after the upheaval, without pain, without a coma, without lies. She died sitting on the Institute's veranda on a spring morning with her hands crossed in her lap and the turquoise scarf around her neck. By her side, a single person, Camilla. The burial was simple. The headstone bore only the phrase, "The truth is the greatest legacy." No surnames, no figures, just that. As they left the cemetery, a reporter tried to interview Camilla. He asked, "What did you learn from all this?" She looked at the sky and replied that sometimes you have to pretend you're not seeing to truly see who people are. And she walked away slowly, feeling the lavender scent of spring mingle with the perfume of memory. Years later, at a social justice exhibition in New York, a video went viral. It showed a millionaire elderly woman waking from a coma upon hearing the voice of her nurse, the only person who, despite being underestimated, dared to speak the truth in a low voice. The title of the exhibit, "When Silence Speaks," and among the displayed objects was the silver brooch shaped like a rocking chair. Camilla never returned to the mansion where she grew up in the kitchen, but one day, discreetly, she had the backyard garden renovated, where her mother used to plant lavender. In its place she erected a stone bench. On it she wrote, "For the women who were expelled from the homes they helped sustain, you were not forgotten." And in every corner of the Institute, a rocking chair, a symbol of rest, dignity, and permanence. Because in the end, the true inheritance is not in what is inherited, but in what is built after everything collapses.